Welcome to the Disaster Resilience Planning for Heritage Resources video series. This video is the third installment in a four-part series to guide development of a disaster resilience plan for heritage resources in your community. The intent is to provide resources for you, the heritage organization, the city planners or other local government officials, or even just the concerned resident to make a disaster resilience plan for your community. In order to develop an effective plan, we need to gather information about risk, vulnerability, and current management practices and conditions of heritage resources. This data will come from a variety of sources: existing plans, historical emergency events, and the perspectives of important stakeholders from your organization, partners, and emergency management professionals. In this video, we will review strategies for collecting these different data, how to synthesize that data, and how it will help to inform your strategies for increasing disaster resilience for heritage resources. We'll outline our four-step process for collecting and synthesizing data to create both organizational and community-wide disaster resilience plans, using specific examples and strategies from Cottage Grove. Our four steps include: convene a committee, collect data for each organization and community-wide, engage in partners in synthesizing data, develop strategies and actions to improve resilience. The final step is addressed in more detail in the guidebook. The first step in the data collection process is to inform a steering committee that consists of all stakeholders that have a role in planning for disaster resilience of heritage resources in your community. This is important because you glean diverse perspectives and knowledge from heritage organization representatives, city representatives, and emergency response staff to identify impacts that you may have never considered and how unexpected hazards impacts may overlap. This group can help to identify what planning documents are important for review, determine which heritage organizations you look to for assessing current conditions, and can help with community survey distribution. When it came to engaging with the steering committee, we tapped into a previously established heritage organization network that has developed a social system, shares information, and collaborates on preservation projects. In 2012, Cottage Grove was recognized as an all-star heritage community by the Oregon Heritage Commission, and since then maintains an all-star heritage committee made up of representatives from several local organizations. For data collection and guidance in the planning process, we engaged closely with Cottage Grove City Planner and the South Lane County Fire Marshal, who both serve on the committee. You will begin your process for data collection by identifying, reviewing, and understanding your community's current disaster planning policies for heritage resources. This can be done by conducting a plan review that focuses on your community's historic preservation plan, comprehensive land use plan, natural hazards mitigation plan, emergency operation plan, and other relevant planning documents, such as plans for historic or Main Street districts, or additional documents identified by city planning staff. These plans will provide context on whether or not heritage resources are reflected in emergency management policies in your city. These documents can typically be found on your city's website, usually under the planning department. If you are not familiar with local government planning documents, we encourage you to contact your local planning department. Staff there will be ready to support your effort and direct you to the appropriate documents. First, historic preservation plans aim to sustainably manage, preserve, and coordinate efforts in the preservation of a city's historic resources. If your city has a historic preservation plan, it may include an inventory of heritage resources in your community. It may not have specific goals or actions around disaster resilience. You will need to review the plan carefully to identify areas that potentially relate to disaster resilience. Next, the Natural Hazard Mitigations Plan provides understanding of how your community can mitigate the risk posed by natural hazards. These plans consider essential infrastructure and vulnerable populations in the city. While heritage resources may be part of the planning or mitigation efforts, these plans often focus on essential services like hospitals or utilities. Emergency operation plans lay out a strategy to coordinate emergency response efforts to protect life and property in the case of natural or human-caused disaster. These plans focus on local government response, including first responders. Comprehensive land use plans regulate the use of land within cities and address a broad spectrum of issues including economy, housing, parks, transportation, and cultural resources. In Oregon, statewide planning goal number 5, natural resources, scenic and historic areas, and open spaces, addresses heritage resources. Your local comprehensive plan should have a chapter devoted to goal 5. In Cottage Grove, the Historic Preservation Plan was adopted as part of the comprehensive plan. Review each plan to identify points of overlap between the goals, actions, and priorities related to both heritage resources and disaster resilience planning. Where does the Natural Hazards Mitigation Plan mention heritage resources and vice versa? We recommend doing this by creating a list of keywords that you associate with heritage resource preservation and natural hazard preservation, such as cultural resources, historic assets or buildings, climate change, disaster, and hazards. Identify where these keywords are mentioned in each plan and make note of the context in which they are mentioned. Hint: hit Ctrl F on your keyboard to save some time reviewing. Take note of absence. A lack of information points to gaps for increasing integration between the plans. In Cottage Grove, the project team reviewed 3 plans: the Preservation Plan, the Natural Hazards Mitigation Plan, and the Emergency Operations Plan. The Cottage Grove Preservation Plan laid the foundation for this project. The plan includes community-wide goals, strategies, and actions that promote interorganizational collaboration, protect designated resources, enhance preservation education, and preserve important cultural landscapes. After searching the Preservation Plan for the terms risk and mitigation, we discovered the following overlap. Goal 4 of the Preservation Plan aims to preserve publicly and privately owned historic resources. This goal includes seismic improvements, an inventory of historic buildings at risk to damage from seismic events, and pursuing funding for seismic improvements and education for property owners on risks and mitigation. After searching for the term cultural resources in the Natural Hazards Mitigation Plan, we discovered the plan includes Goal 5, which states to protect natural, historic, and cultural resources. In reviewing these 2 plans, we looked for evidence that the plans either supported preservation or left gaps. In Cottage Grove, we found intersections between plans. However, cultural resources weren't addressed in depth, so in an emergency event, they would not be prioritized in a meaningful way. Conducting a plan review provides you with a starting point to see what local policies are in place or not in place to protect heritage resources during a natural disaster or hazardous event. Step 2 in your data collection process helps you to understand current conditions that will affect disaster preparation and response within your organization and within the community. To begin, you will need to assess what is at risk within your organization. This begins with collecting data pertaining to your organization's assets that could be affected by an emergency event. Your assets include your people, places, and things. Some emergency events may affect the ability of your essential team members to continue their roles. That could be because of loss of funding, loss of volunteers, or communication issues. For example, a board member or essential staff member may not be present to make a critical and timely decision during an emergency. Some hazards may affect your physical place, where you store and display collections, or where your staff manage important operations. For example, structural damage from flooding, limited resources to pay rent, or make regular repairs, or vandalism to the building could pose a risk. Some hazards can affect your organization's things, the valuable and irreplaceable assets that you steward, or systems that are essential to your business operations. By looking at emergency events from the past that have impacted your resources, you can shape new management policies to prevent or mitigate risk in the future. Engaging with your steering committee will help you gather data pertaining to current conditions in organizations. To collect information on each of Cottage Grove's organizations, people, places, and things, we began by providing each organization with a questionnaire. The questionnaire helps us understand what the organizations need to maintain their operations, remain financially viable, and deliver essential services to accomplish their mission. The complete questionnaire is available as an appendix to the guidebook. Next, we assessed current management practices and risk perception through interviews and focus groups with board members. In these conversations, we asked board members to discuss past emergencies that affected their organization, communication strategies for emergency response, and what internal decision-making structures currently exist. Interview guides and board meeting agendas are available within the guidebook to adapt for your community. By collecting data about each organization's management practices, we better understand the vulnerability they may face. For example, through interviews with the Cottage Grove Museum, we learned that the museum relies on the full board of directors to make decisions. Their current decision-making strategies will be less effective in response and recovery stages of a large-scale disaster or emergency, because board members may be unavailable to participate in decision-making during an emergency or may have different priorities in a large-scale event. After assessing the conditions of each organization, we wanted to understand the community's awareness of resources and organizations, personal values and importance placed on resources, and the perception of heritage resources being at risk to both natural and human-caused disasters. We gathered this data through a community survey. In assessing community awareness, we found that 97% of Cottage Grove's respondents answered that historic preservation was very important or important to maintaining the identity of Cottage Grove. But only 37% of respondents agreed that their personal identity was reflected by Cottage Grove's heritage resources. These results show us that while survey respondents strongly support heritage preservation efforts, there are opportunities to further expand our definitions on what constitutes a community identity. As a way to build the diversity and redundancy of heritage organizations, they can ensure their work includes the stories and histories of underrepresented groups. Additionally, the survey can be used to make decisions about resource and community support during emergency response and recovery. Questions about the Cottage Grove community's risk perception showed just over half of respondents reported that they would be willing to donate their time and money to support heritage organizations in disaster response efforts. Of those willing to donate their money, 78% would give directly to the organization of their choice, and 23% would give to a citywide disaster response fund for all heritage organizations. These results can help guide the allocation of resources in the response phase through increasing community awareness and value of heritage resources during the mitigation and preparedness phases. A survey is an important strategy for building public involvement in planning for heritage resources, specifically in understanding how the community values these resources and may prioritize their preservation. At this point, you have considered a plan review, assessed conditions and management practices of heritage organizations, and measured community interest and awareness through your survey. The next step is to synthesize your data into key findings, goals, and action items. In Cottage Grove, we conducted a disaster resilience workshop with our steering committee to review key findings and to guide next steps in creating goals, strategies, and actions. Our workshop was 3 hours long, and we provided a cultural resilience framework that grounded our key findings in 4 applicable resilience planning principles. The resilience principles included diversity and redundancy, broadening participation, encouraging learning, and increasing connectivity. We designed activities to encourage committee members to brainstorm opportunities for integrating these principles into their management practices. Activities promoted committee members to think about the impacts of hypothetical hazards and how those affect your people, places, and things. And second, what your organization would do right now to respond to the hypothetical event. We recommend conducting a workshop that focuses on disaster scenarios to establish and identify what the impacts of your current management policies are. Additionally, workshop activities can help to identify what could be done to improve policies for hazard mitigation. Material for conducting a disaster resilience workshop is available as an appendix to the guidebook. For the Cottage Grove Disaster Resilience Plan, we created a plan for each heritage organization that includes resilience goals, strategies, and action items. These plans included background information, risk assessments, and an overview of the organization's essential functions, business operations, current coping strategies, and timelines for each heritage organization to implement recorded action items. As a committee, you have the opportunity to look for connections between each organizational plan to look for shared needs and strategies. A community-wide plan can help leverage more collaboration between organizations, access funding opportunities, and build capacity. Look to the guidebook for more information on the final step in the process, creating a community-wide strategy and action plan. This project was the result of a partnership between the University of Oregon's Institute for Policy Research and Engagement, All-Star Heritage Community of Cottage Grove, Oregon Heritage Program staff, and the City of Cottage Grove staff. In the next video, you will hear from a panel of stakeholders from the Cottage Grove pilot project as they share their experience and ideas for how to best develop a disaster resilience plan in your community. If you would like more information about this project or how to create a disaster resilience plan for heritage resources in your community, please go to the Oregon Heritage website to download the complete guidebook. We hope this helps you and your community develop strategies to protect your heritage resources.